And now, two guys that survived watching an entire season of Survivor, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 17 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan.
In today's episode, we give you In the Rabbit Hole news and become redundant on redundancy. You are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. In the Rabbit Hole news.
Aaron, tell me about the rabbits.
The rabbits are doing well. It is amazing just how much pellet small animals will produce.
Excrement, I believe, is the word you're looking for.
Yes, but they come out as strange, small little pellets. The only real issues I've had as of late is the automatic watering system is rather complicated. The real issue is just that I have to drag the 5 gallon bucket about 200 yards to go fill it and then drag it back again, which wouldn't normally be an issue, but to raise it up so that the bucket is approximately 18 inches above the rabbits to generate enough water pressure, it's requiring a pulley system because we now have 50 pounds of water, which Jason McConnell and I can lift. But if both of us are out of town and I need Jen to go do it or an assistant or something like that, it's a pretty heavy, big bucket of water to try to lift over your head.
So in the end, when you start recommending things to do that you didn't do, maybe you would recommend putting the rabbits closer to a hose.
Well, I would certainly do that in the exact
situation. By the way, I'm not being a smartass here. The only place
you are being a smartass.
No, the only place he could put the rabbits was nowhere near water.
Yeah, unfortunately,
but if you could have, you would have put them on the other side of the building.
If I could have, I would have put them on the other side of the building, where the only outside water hydrant was.
I'm just making it clear to everyone who's listening that if you were to do it,
if I was to do it, and I had my pick,
and if you would recommend for other people to do it,
I
would closer to a water supply.
Yeah, well, if you're going to use the automatic watering system or the gravity-fed watering system, like what I did, put it near a water supply. True shit that hit the fan situation. Yeah, all right, you're going to be traveling down to a river or whatever to get your water, but we're not in that situation, so don't make it harder for yourself than you need to be.
And I mean, the advantage of an automatic water supply, just for everyone listening, is that you do not have to fill bowls for an ever-growing number of when you're only at 4, filling the bowls for 4 rabbits is pretty easy.
Yeah.
But when you start getting to 18 and then potentially 36 and more, I mean, they grow, like they say, they breed like rabbits, so exponentially.
The other thing that you run into is that with the gravity-fed system, you put a 5-gallon bucket on there, that will supply 4 rabbits with enough water for several days. So you can actually go leave the rabbits alone, go out of town. At that point, you would just fill their feeders up a lot more than you would normally.
Right.
So that's interesting. We're still trying to get a handle, and there's a lot of little stupid things to deal with dealing with the watering system. The spigot that we installed on that bucket has a terrible gasket system, and the stupid thing leaks.
And did all 4 rabbits figure out how to use the water system now?
They did. Okay. Originally, one of the rabbits I suspected was having an issue, and rather than taking the chance on that rabbit dehydrating and then it becoming a real issue and what I would amount to abusing the animal, I just went ahead and gave him a water bowl for a couple days until I finally caught him or her, because I don't know what it is yet. I'm respecting its privacy at the moment. But until I actually saw it using the water nipple from the automatic system, I didn't trust that it was drinking enough.
He was either slow or she was either slow, or you just didn't catch him.
Well, it's not that. I mean, they don't sit there all day drinking on it. So what I had to do to try to figure out if all of the rabbits were using the system or not was to see if they were urinating. And since I can't stand around all day and watch the rabbits urinate, I had to look for urine marks on the concrete underneath the cage. And it didn't look like that rabbit was urinating. So But that
All
rabbit
right.
just happened to be urinating a little bit less than the rest, and or was urinating in a similar spot. It's a long story that's more about rabbit urine than anybody wants to know.
That's
So
probably true.
we'll
Probably
move
true.
on to something else about the rabbits.
Well, so overall, their well-being's good. They're
The
doing well.
the well-being's good. I actually I did break down, and Jason McConnell has already made fun of me for it. I bought them grass mats.
Well, these are the breeders, though.
These are the breeders. So the breeders are gonna these rabbits are gonna be around for 6 to 10 years.
Right. And these are juveniles, so you caught them relatively young,
Yeah, they're
or
3 or 4 months
adolescents, I
old.
guess.
They're juniors at
Yeah.
this point. 3 are 4 months old. One of them is 5 months old. I got them grass mats to sit on throughout the day. They very rarely sit on them. They more than anything they just chew on them, which is fine because that's I guess how rabbits pass the time. I also bought them these grass balls that they can play with. I bought them off Amazon. I think in total I spent like $24 for 4 rabbits to have a grass mat and a toy. They don't really seem that interested in either of them yet. That could just be I have incredibly lazy rabbits, or this breed is just not that playful, or
Yeah, and
they.
you'd actually heard that this breed is not particularly playful.
That was part of the. Well, I hear I've seen conflicting things about that because I'll look up stuff about the rabbits online, and I'll see people say no, they're very friendly or they're very playful or whatnot. And then talking to the breeder, that was part of the push, and some of the books I've read on it, that was part of the push for using this rabbit, which this rabbit was primarily developed as a commercial rabbit. And by commercial, I mean it was bred to be used for its fur and meat.
Right, right.
So they're not compared to like a Flemish Giant or something, they don't have the personality of some of the other pet rabbits.
And just to remind everybody, which breed of rabbit did you go with?
The Californian.
Okay.
The other option was the New Zealand. Those are the two most popular rabbits for using for meat production, meat and fur production.
So now back to some of the operational stuff.
Mm,
We just had some rain in Houston.
yeah,
It's been forever, so
yeah. I think it had
it's a
actually been about 3 months since we
yeah,
had rain.
it's a moment that stood out in my head. But thinking about it, how did the cages hold up? How did the roofs of the cages hold up? How did the rabbits do during the rain? Was there any issues?
There was no issues. The rabbits were all fine. What I did find was the roofs need a little more overhang on either end,
Okay.
but front to back they have. I think each rabbit has about a foot and 3 inch overhang. So they were perfectly dry. They were fine. The cages are pretty heavy, and they really don't shake or move as much as you'd think they would. And the area that they're in creates kind of a wind tunnel. So they have kind of a constant breeze on 'em, which is great in Houston. In winter, I'll have to cut that down so they don't have a constant cold breeze blowing over them.
Right. And overall, we haven't had super hot weather yet. I mean,
No, it hadn't gotten
we've
there
had
yet,
highs and maybe the high 80s. We've hit a couple of low 90s, but that's been
which is
really rare lately.
extremely unusual for Houston this
Yeah,
time of the year. Well, I mean, the
it's running
rain
late.
was also us having a drought. I mean, usually
Yeah.
this time of the year, it's you can't go a single day without getting rain.
Right, right.
Which was another originally I would have really liked to have been able to set up a rain catchment system and water the rabbits that way and just have the system that I now have in place as a backup system.
Right.
But that's, 3 months of a drought, that's proven impractical.
Yeah, filling a 5-gallon bucket off the rain these days is going to take you 3 months.
Yeah, and even the other day, I mean, it came down pretty hard, but I don't think it would have filled the bucket.
Oh no, I don't think you would have
Yeah.
gotten a 5-gallon.
But well, the only things right now are the rabbits just kind of hang out all day, and so we're not really. They don't require much effort or attention the majority of the time. I go back and kind of visit with them 3 times a day and check on them.
Right now, it's really just care, feeding, and
Yeah, it's just
general
care feeding
upkeep.
and just kind of me getting used to the rabbits, and the rabbits getting used to me, and Jason and you coming by, and
Hmm.
I actually did let Jen go and pet them for a few minutes, and then cut her off and said no more. No, I'm just kidding. I let her pet them as long as she wanted to.
How long till these guys are ready for
They
breeding?
will start breeding in September.
Okay, and then what does the time frame look like from now? And we'll go back to this, for everybody listening. I want to bring it up now because I'm curious. I want to hear what the time frames look like so that we can start getting ready. But we'll go over it again.
In talking to the breeder, they can actually be bred about every, I think it was like 35 days or something, but
Oh wow.
that's really pushing it, and
Yeah,
that's really
and
stressing
I
a
know you're not
doe.
even looking to do that much breeding
No,
because you don't need that much
I don't need
output.
that much, and I don't see the reason on stressing out the does.
Right.
It's just there's no reason for it.
So once you start the breeding process, how long until you can expect a litter? And I'm
31.
assuming it's called a litter. I really don't know. Or is it a brood?
I think it is a litter. I need to get back. I need to get back to you on that. I don't
Okay.
remember exactly. I know what it's called when they have a litter. It's kindling. Oddly
Okay.
enough,
Kindling. There you
yeah.
go. How about this? How long until they have babies?
They will breed. They will have from the day of conception to the day they have babies is about 30 to 31 days, and apparently
Okay.
it's very much like
So
clockwork
it's a
for
pretty
them.
short gestation
It's a
cycle.
very short, and you can give them 2 weeks. You can give them a month. I'll probably be giving them a 2 week rest,
Hmm.
and then I'll breed them again. And
And how many offspring can we expect?
it really depends on the first litter. Somebody throw it in the show notes if you actually do know what a small litter of rabbits is, or
Yeah,
if we are
please do.
actually calling it right. Because I never did actually see, or if I did, I skipped over it when I was
Yeah,
reading.
I've heard lots of descriptions of different types of
Yeah,
animals and their kids, but I don't think I've ever heard rabbits.
yeah.
I don't know why. I just haven't.
6 to 12, it's kind of a range, but it
Oh
also
wow.
depends because
So it really is
there's
potential exponential growth.
oh yeah, average to expect from what I understand is about 8 to 10.
Is that per rabbit?
That is per doe.
Okay, so per doe. So
It,
basically, in this cycle, we could expect 16 on average if you
we
bred both
could
does.
expect, I think reasonably we could expect 18.
Okay.
I There's a high rate with first time mothers of them giving birth outside of their little brooding nest, or
Hmm.
well, that's pigeons. Their little breeding boxes
Hmm.
that they have the litter in, and so there's a bit of a mortality rate issue since we're doing it in September, where it's Houston, so it'll still be reasonably warm here.
Oh yeah, yeah. Just for those listening, we can expect staying in the high 80s until after Halloween.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's quite often we get into December and it's still in the
Yeah.
80s. It just depends. So it shouldn't be too bad. So I'm kind of guessing we'll have about 18 rabbits to deal with
Okay.
come uh towards the end of October, maybe the very beginning of November,
Wow.
somewhere in there. And that so Jason and I will be building another set of cages. I think we're gonna, as soon as we mate the rabbits, the we'll start building another set of cages, which is another thing. I mean, we put a fair amount of thought into the design of these cages and looked at a lot of different systems of building and suspending these cages. But once we got them up and suspended, I mean, it's like everything. You look at it and you go, oh, we could have done this, we could have done that. So what we were going to do was have a run of cages down either side of this space on opposite ends, and the rabbits were kind of facing each other.
And we'll post some pictures. I know Aaron took 8 hours of video. I don't know how long it's going to take to edit all
Yeah,
that
that was
video.
another thing I was going to bring up. That I keep promising this video of Jason and I building these cages, but it finally, when I finally got done pulling it out of the camera, I was having a real nightmare
But
with this stupid
what
JVC.
we can do for everybody is get some pictures up so that you can
Yeah,
get.
there are
Okay.
pictures on Facebook. I
Okay.
put a couple pictures of the rabbits themselves and a few pictures of the
Great.
cages. And that reminds me, they're within a week to 2 weeks of this episode airing, there will be an article I'm writing for SaveOurSkills.com on building rabbit hutches,
Okay.
and so I'll put a link on that in Facebook and I'll tweet it, and we'll throw the link in next week's, or whenever I get the URL for that, I'll put the link in that episode when it comes out.
And I know we're not doing a full episode on it right now, but I know a lot of people are curious. If somebody wanted to get into this like you've now started,
Hmm.
and we're actually going to recommend to everyone listening to really follow this with Aaron before you start doing it. I mean, if you
Yeah,
want to, that's cool, go for it, but then share with us what you're doing as well,
yeah.
because we'd like to learn from you as much as you want to learn from us.
But I would
But
suggest letting me make the mistakes
yeah, let us
first.
make all the mistakes first.
Yeah.
We are more than happy to go do that for everybody and fall down on our faces, look like crazy nut jobs before you go do it.
we're
Um,
experienced and professionals.
yes, we are professionals in doing that. But I am going to ask you, Aaron.
Mm,
I know a lot of people are probably curious if they wanted to go get started with, like you did, about 4 rabbits,
hmm
about the kind of caging you did. What is the general idea for, give us a ballpark of startup cost?
Well, I think there are some things that Jason and I could have definitely done to reduce costs.
Right, and I'm going to say instead of giving us spoilers to your article,
Uh-huh.
just give us a ballpark of like the general idea of what the startup on something like this
Well,
is.
that was I need to kind of preface it
Okay,
with that because the number is actually kind of high. It was higher
right.
than I expected it to
Okay,
be. For one thing, we started off with the best of materials that we could find and the best materials recommended to us. So we spent a little extra on a lot of stuff.
which by the way, I mean, and I hate to cut you off on that
No,
one,
no, that's fine.
but in general, you and I tend to have that same philosophy of we'd rather spend a little bit more upfront and buy the best of stuff, especially when we're not 100% sure of what we're doing,
Yeah,
than have to replace it 5 or 6 times along the way.
which we have a funny story about, but we'll
Right.
we'll
We're
we'll
going to
save it
save
for a
that, but
rainy day.
that's the general idea there, though. It's if you have the opportunity and if you have the funds and capability of going and buying the best, you're usually going to be better off doing that, and in the long run, you'll spend less money.
Yeah. And this, and I also looked at it as this is building, this project is, will end up being a tax write off at the end of the year for the
Right.
rabbit hole. So I had that to consider when I considered what was being spent on it.
Yep.
But we spent in the neighborhood of $600 for these rabbits and these cages and the watering system and everything that went in. And the rabbits, we paid a little more than is normally it is kind of normal, like normal for rabbits of this age and everything. You can expect to for this breed, you can expect to spend about $10.
Right.
The rabbits themselves are not expensive. I asked for near show quality. I asked for a much higher breed than I think is really required.
Right. And you were going through a breeder who was a little bit more expensive, but was also able to share her experience with you.
She's actually no, I mean she's no
Is she the
more
same price?
expensive.
Okay.
She's the same price. I
Okay.
just kind of said, look,
Ah,
this is what I'm doing with this.
got it.
This is what I want. I really do want to hire grade of rabbit. And I mean, she was joking with me. She was like, "Well, how high do you want to go?" She's like, "I have $400 show rabbits in here." I was like, "No, no, no, no! I don't have a $400 per rabbit feeling about this."
And they're not getting rhinestone collars either, so.
Well, as long as we keep Jen away from them, they
Right,
won't.
right.
She actually was trying to get collars on them, and I was like, "Absolutely
Yeah,
not."
no, no.
But the
You only let her name one, right? Is that
I
how the
did.
story
I
goes?
only now. There's really no reason to not name these four because
Right.
these are the breeders. These aren't going anywhere unless they don't produce. They're not going anywhere. So I let her name the boy, and I let her name him Bobo.
But are you sure which boy?
Well, that's another funny story because she showed us when Jason and I went out to the farm. She showed us how to sex the rabbits, and so by the time we got back, we were tired. We'd been dealing with this all day long. And Jason and I look at each other, and I'm just kind of like, you know what? I do not feel like standing here sexing these rabbits to figure out which one to go in what cage.
I don't blame you personally.
So I was like, you know what? We're not even breeding for several months. Let's just throw them in whatever cage.
Right, and the male's testicles will drop,
Yeah, his
so
testicles haven't
you'll
dropped.
figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. In a few months, or I think in 2 months, his testicles will drop, and it'll be very obvious who the boy is.
Right.
So, yeah, we just kind of threw him in there, and we're like, it doesn't matter which one was in what cage. We just kind of threw him in there. But the cage seems to, it all seems to be working out well. The only thing is the water system is aggravating me at the moment, and I have some little things to figure out, like the pulley system to raise and lower the water bucket. We're going to need to, we came up with some better ideas of the construction of the cages. So when we do build the next set of cages in August or September, we will be reconfiguring the way we built the first set,
Right.
so that the cages are actually back to back and share a back wall. And that will actually, I mean, those are kind of the things I was talking about. Like, there are things we could have done that would have saved on materials in the construction.
Right, right.
So we'll be doing that and stuff. And I mean, we'll do pictures and video of that process again as we work to improve it. But other than
Definitely
that,
pictures, probably video.
probably, but well, the video will come out sooner or later. It's just I have to sit down and edit 8 hours of video. That'll probably be good for 40 hours worth of my time, which is part of the reason why I've been avoiding doing it. That and I have tendonitis, which didn't really get brought up, but this has been going on for a couple months now. So I've been trying to let one of my arms take it easy. I almost tore a bicep tendon, which has cut down on my ability to write, cut down on my ability to work on things. So I've been trying to take it easy, but I'm starting to get back in the swing of things and get more articles out to, but not only the rabbit hole, but also to some other sites and get some guest blogging in and stuff like that. Which, speaking of guest blogging,
Yep.
we're going to have a special guest next week, and he's going to come talk to us about emergency medical, and his name is Ron Davis from Confessions of an EMS Newbie podcast. We suggest everybody go check him out.
Yeah, go take a look at his site. Go listen to his podcast. We're huge fans of it. We've listened to a few now, and we're going to keep listening to him because he's got great information. Check his site out. But what we're going to ask you to do is he's coming to visit us at the end of the week. So between now and then, please send us any questions you have for him. He has all kinds of information. Again, if you check out his site, check out his podcast, go see what he's an expert in and send us your questions.
And there will be a link in the show notes today to his website, or you
Right.
can just Google Confessions of an EMS Newbie podcast.
Right. And again, his name is Ron Davis.
Yep. And you have some news for us about some Boy Scouts and a lesson about being prepared.
Yes. So 6 Louisiana Boy Scouts were actually stranded in Arkansas during all this flooding. And they were stranded for 36 hours in a part of the Arkansas forest that last year during flooding, 20 people died in. And Aaron, guess why they survived?
Why did they survive?
Because they're Boy Scouts and they were prepared.
Now,
And
how many
go ahead.
how many Scoutmasters did they start with, and how many Scoutmasters did they leave with?
They say they started and left with 2.
I think there might have been a third.
I think so too, and maybe they ate the last guy. But
Cannibal
hey,
Boy Scouts.
It happens. It happens. It happens to people who are in planes that crash. They just don't like talking about it afterwards.
It's a traumatic experience.
It must be. Must be. They didn't have rabbits.
Which leads us into the main topic of the show today, which is redundancy. There are 2 methods we're going to talk about with redundancy today to get it started. There's the military adage, which is 2 is 1 and 1 is none, which is simply if you have 1 and it breaks, then you have nothing.
Right.
If you have 2 and 1 breaks, then you still have 1. And it kind of goes back to fire making. In most fire making kits, and when people talk about survival, they always talk about going out into the woods or wherever with more than one way to make fire.
Right, and I think the reason they do that is fire is something we all can get our hands around, right? I mean,
Yeah.
everyone out there who's listening to this show right now, probably at one time or another, at the very least, even if you are the most urbanite on the planet, at some point or another, you had to light a gas stove.
Yes.
With a match.
Or a barbecue pit.
Or a barbecue pit or something. Fire is such an item we all get that it makes sense. So we're going to start there as well.
With that concept, you start looking at your basic survival needs: food, water, shelter, fire, security, things like that, and looking for ways to build in redundancy into what you have. With home security, it can be personal defense in the form of firearms, which we are proponents of because we believe it is the most effective means of personal defense once you've gotten to that point in a situation.
Right. You are
Hopefully
the
you
only
never
one
ever do.
responsible for your own defense at the end of the day.
Right. And then there's the other layer of defense, which is an alarm system on your home, lights on the outside of your home, things like that.
Right. And that's a good point about redundancy, what you just said there, which is
Mhm.
redundancy doesn't mean having 2 Bic lighters. Redundancy could be within the form of security of you have an alarm system and the redundant thing is the lights. So you have a well-lit home.
Mhm.
You don't need 2 alarm systems. That's not what we're advocating here.
No, but I mean, even with alarm system, you can get into redundancy of the
Yes.
alarm having 2 ways of
Oh, yeah.
communicating. The alarm it can go through regular telephone lines, or it has a backup system of cellular.
Oh, and just so everyone knows, we are aware of the fact that redundancy can be taken to the utmost levels. I mean, it just to
Oh, it can get to the point of
minutia.
absolute absurdity and minutia.
So we're going to keep it at a relatively high level throughout the show, but understand the concept could be applied to just about anything.
Yes. And moving on to the rule of threes,
A slightly more advanced version of
this
redundancy.
is a much more advanced, more complicated and very easily more costly concept of the rule of
It's
threes.
actually easier to start, and we brought it up first because it's a good place to start. The two is one and one is none concept. If you start with that, moving to the rule of threes
Much
is
easier.
much easier. Yeah.
Yeah. The rule of threes, I first learned about the rule of threes, and there's two different rules of threes in the survival community.
Right.
There's one rule of threes that is not about redundancy. It's you have 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 seconds without
There's
air,
3 minutes without air,
or
but
three
yeah,
minutes without air, not 3 seconds. So there's that
yeah,
rule of
that's a
threes.
different rule of
That's a
threes.
different rule of threes, and we want to make that distinction today. There's another rule of threes that is not often talked about. I first read about it in what was it? Ragnar's Urban Survival Guide, which there is a review of that book on the site, and we will also link to it in the show notes today for anybody that wants to go back and see what the book was about. Ragnar Benson's Urban Survival Guide comes at it from the standpoint of that you need three means to obtain any one of the primary survival items. And he talked about that it originated from the Nez Pierce Indians. I'm not really sure of the correct pronunciation of that. I've also heard it talked about in some other instances vaguely, but without origins. I think, Jonathan, you even said at one point in a brief, we were having a conversation about it, and you said you thought you saw it on Shiloh TV.
Yeah, I thought there was something on Shiloh TV about it, and then I recently heard that it actually even comes from, and this is not me getting religious or anything, but there's some biblical aspects to the concept of the rule of threes as well.
Get biblical on it, man.
Yeah, and it's this. I guess it just know that the whole concept is old. It's
Yes.
very old. There's a lot of people who talk about it. We're not going to tell you that there's one person who invented it. It's been around a long time.
So if you take the rule of threes and start with food, there's food prep in your home, there's short term, long term storables, and then there's growing your own food, rabbits, vegetables, whatever you're going to do for that. There's also caching in other places so you could have it in your home. We were talking about this the other day, and we've like my food preps are in my home, but in the studio here, we've also started storing some stuff here to have a
Right.
small cache here.
And this
Which,
happens to be on the second floor.
so Houston being prone to flooding, if now my house is pretty high up, but if the flood wires were high enough on my street or something,
Right.
there would still be food, water, and shelter up
Right. If for some
in.
reason you had to leave the house itself and move up here into the garage apartment,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that would happen. But if you did, you have food stores here.
And then you can look at this is a more complicated issue of doing communal, so where maybe you have storage at a friend's house or a family member's house. That gets more complicated and
Right.
problematic, but it is another option.
And from a simplistic point of view, we even talked about this a little bit in the bag show, where you may want to have some of the what do you call them, Aaron? I just slipped out of my head. The meals. Yeah,
MREs,
you might want to have some MREs, or not. It wasn't MRE specific. C
oh, sea
rations.
rations.
Sorry about that, everyone. You might want to have some C rations in your bag that can get you through 24, 48, 36, or 72 hours, depending on
Yeah.
which bag it is. That's actually a form of redundancy right there. You
Hmm.
have food stores in your home. You also have a food store, even though it's short term, in your car.
And in your bug out bag and
Right.
wherever else you've put it. I've also am moving towards doing a small cache at my office.
Right. And again, this all plays into the rule of threes where they may not all be identical, but they are all a redundant thing to your need.
Hmm. And I mean, there's plenty of instances where severe weather hits and people get stuck at their office.
Right. And you may be stuck at your office for 24 or 48
Yeah.
hours.
And if you have a small cache there, I mean, that's not always the easiest thing because most
Right.
people these days, I think, work in a cubicle.
Right.
They don't have a lockable office. I think even you, when you were still with Hewlett Packard,
Yep.
you went from having a big corner office and then
Yeah.
they were doing stupid
With its
crap.
own
And
mini fridge and everything
yeah, and
to a
then they
little
started
cubicle.
consolidating and you wound up in a
Right.
cubicle, even though
But
you were at a high
exact
level with
yeah,
the company.
exactly. That's and that it works that way for a lot of us, but that goes back to the whole everyday carry bag.
Yes.
And if your everyday carry bag blends into the way you go to work every day and it complies with, you have to follow employee rules and regulations too. So if you aren't allowed to have a firearm, don't have a firearm. If you aren't allowed to have a pocket knife, don't keep one in that bag. But you might want to keep one in the car. And I'm not talking about a firearm. Check your state laws again. I'm going to go back to all that legal stuff. But
Yeah.
make sure you follow your local laws, rules, regulations, and also your office regulations because you don't want to lose a job over this. But that everyday carry bag you might have should have some, even if it's just a few Cliff Bars to get you through a 24-hour period.
Yeah, and that was where I started with my caching at my office. Where and it started with I eat a snack every day at 3 o'clock to kind of get myself through the day
Right.
and to maintain eating 6 times a day pattern. So it started with that, and I would just use Cliff Bars. And so what I did was instead of just taking a Cliff Bar with me every day to work, I started buying the what is it, 24 packs of Cliff Bars,
Yeah.
and I would leave a box of those at the office, and then it was 2 boxes of Cliff Bars at the office. No, it's not an ideal meal replacement, but at that point, it was a relatively inexpensive, small way to do caching in
Right.
my
And this is the
office.
short term redundant cache. So this isn't a cache that needs to last you a month.
Yeah.
This is the cache that needs to last you to a point where you can get back to your main cache, which is probably at your home. And
Hmm.
again, we're talking about preparing for the most likely scenarios. And in the case of what we're talking about, where either Aaron and I get caught at the office, the most likely scenario is you get caught for a day or two. I mean, I remember during the flooding that Houston had a big flood called Allison, and Allison really flooded a major part of the city, and that could have kept you from getting home for a good 24 to 36 hours.
Easily.
Yeah, and so in that particular case, you might have been stuck on the fifth floor of whatever building you worked at for a day and a half to 2 days. And yeah, the vending machine might have been good for the first few hours until everybody raided it, and there was nothing left in it.
And even then, I mean, you're not
Right.
exactly going to get very quality.
Right.
You're not going to be able to match what you could have brought from home and
Exactly.
stored or kept in your EDC bag or
Yeah.
your car bag or
Right. A
anything
Cliff
like
Bar is
that.
going to be better than a Snickers.
Oh God, yeah.
So going back to that whole idea of the rule of threes, or even the rule of two is one and one is none. Two is one and one is none really does apply to true redundancy much more. But in the rule of threes, you really can apply it to, okay, the most likely scenarios kind of concept. Now, that's not using it to its full effect, but that
No.
gets you a lot of the way there.
And we can get a little deeper into it here for a few minutes for
Yeah.
just conversation's sake, which is that once you start building those caches, here's what can happen. Like we just talked about it a minute ago, something can happen to your primary cache. Your house can get taken by a tornado, taken by a flood, earthquake,
Yeah.
fire, whatever. You can then move to one of your other caches, whether it be a small cache at a family member's home
Right.
or in a separate structure that's on your property, or, even a small cache in your office.
Yep.
When you're caching those items, they all become a redundant system, not just I'm here and I have a cache here that I don't have to drag around with me.
Yeah.
They also become other options that you're afforded should something happen to your main
And I think
option.
that's a good point. In the whole concept of this rule of threes, and this is again not necessarily playing into it exactly as it's spelled out in a lot of the writings that I've read about it, but in this particular case, use it as a system,
Hmm.
just like Aaron said, and in that system know, okay, I have the following things here, and I have a few more things here, and any one of those can get me through a certain amount of time. And that's really the critical thing, the
Yeah.
critical factor. It's, can I make it through the stressful time that might happen due to a natural disaster or some kind of an event that you have no control over?
And you may run into some resistance if you're in a relationship or you're married or whatever, where somebody's asking, well, why are we buying some of this? You can always fall back on the argument of that it's capital deferment. You're going to buy it anyway at some point. That money's going to be outlaid at some point for that item. None of this goes to waste as long as you're utilizing your system in an appropriate manner and burning through consumables, whether it be food or any other kind of consumables, in the amount of time necessary so that you're keeping a rotation
Yeah, I
going.
think that's a really good point. The capital deferment's a good one. And then honestly, just utilizing the natural disaster preparedness that FEMA tells you to do is a
Yeah, our
great
own
way to
government
start
does
preparing.
tell us
Right. Now, they don't necessarily tell you to do it in the rule of threes,
no,
but if you explain it in a rational way, and really we're not going, tinfoil hat crazy here. The whole idea is a
no.
rational way to deal with the things that are most likely going to happen to you. Um, this is a great way to explain it to someone. Look, I live in Houston, so a great way to sit there with my wife is to sit down and say, all right, hurricane season's coming. Let's make sure that we are fully prepared for hurricane season. Now, we're always prepared for hurricane season. It doesn't matter whether it's the middle of December or entering hurricane season, soon.
But that's because we're preppers and survivalists.
Exactly. But for me to sit down with Karen, my wife, and have that discussion with her is an easy one. I don't have to sit there and say it's capital deferment or this, that. Now, she also understands that to some extent we are preppers and, you know, Aaron does it a little bit more than I do, but in all reality, we're very much more prepared than 99.99% of the public, most likely.
Yeah, and as I'm sure most of our listeners are too.
Exactly.
And
And what
but
we're trying to do is help you get a little bit more prepared by giving you a
yeah,
strategy.
and even as preppers, man, I can't talk today. Even as preppers, I'll run into it occasionally with Jen. We were at Costco 2 weeks ago, and I was buying extra rubbing alcohol to keep up in the studio and hydrogen peroxide. And she looked at me, and I think she just wasn't thinking, and so she was like, "You just bought a bunch of that last month. I know you haven't used it. You don't need more." And I was like, "Well, and I was just like, God, I don't want to have I don't want this to turn into an argument in the middle of Costco." And I was like, so I just looked at her. I was like, "Well, we are preppers. We do store. We're kind of squirrely that way." But I explained to her, I was like, "Well, I'm starting caches in other places, and this is going up into the studio where I'm actually more likely to injure myself or cut myself doing something stupid or somebody hurt
Don't
themselves
cut me,
up.
man.
I'm gonna cut you. I'm gonna cut you." But we do goofy stuff up here, experimenting with products and doing product reviews. So anything
Yep.
can happen. So I was like, well, we need basic medical supplies up here as well. So once I explained it in a rational way and didn't get upset with her of why are you asking me what seemed like a stupid question at the time, just kind of reminded her, then it was fine. But these are,
Right.
you got to expect these conversations, and I don't think it matters if you're talking about men or women. It's anybody in the relationship or anyone
Right.
in that pair or group or whatever can occasionally just have a brain fart and not think about it. So you got to be prepared to have those
Well, and I think
conversations.
the other nice thing is not nice actually. The other terrible thing is that at any given time, it's pretty easy to find a way of explaining it to somebody. I mean, right now, and this may date the show, but that's okay. Not date the show right now, but in the future when people listen to it 5 years from now, because we become that popular.
Yes.
uh, all the flooding that's going on right now along the Mississippi. There are people who are losing their homes. They're losing everything they've ever. If you live along the Mississippi right now, there's a good chance you're dealing with flooding.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that is a great way to go into a preparedness discussion, even if it's not about the rule of three specific to food stashing, because that does become difficult if the whole region has flooded.
Yeah.
Um,
But that's a different conversation we'll get into
right,
in a minute.
but we'll get into a little bit more about that concept. But the rule of threes even applies to other ideas like even evacuation routes.
Mm-hmm.
It applies to um, general transportation. Everything that you might need falls under the rule of threes.
Yes. And like we were saying a second ago, you can get into even more complicated, where you get into having a bug out location.
Right.
And so this is an urban survival show that doesn't exclude that some people may want a bug out location. I've been looking at property in a rural setting for probably about the last 3 years. I'm not at a point now where I'm financially comfortable doing that. Jen's still in college to become a dentist at some point, so that's where the bulk of our money's being focused at the moment. But at some point, I would like to have. But I don't look at it as a bug out location.
Right. And we've had this discussion a
Yeah,
few times. It's to both of us, I think we've both talked about it in different areas. We dream about the ability to go to places like Dripping Springs or Wimberley, Texas, where property values are through the roof. But in reality, let's say we went somewhere else, but the goal of it is not a bug out location, it's a retreat.
it is. It's if you like camping, which we really. Oh God, I'm having real
Are you
issues
being
today.
attacked by your mic?
My microphone is having a zombie apocalypse moment and attacking me. The all right, train of thought lost for a second. So the bug out location, and
Right.
yeah, a few years ago when we first got into this, we wanted a bug out location for a bug outlet, and it was like, oh my God, I need to move to St. Kitts or something,
Oh, well,
or
yeah, and
have
it
a
was
home.
we're going to build a bunker there too.
Well,
I mean, it was
right, but moving back and becoming more sensible, more practical people, we looked at it from the standpoint of we really enjoy camping. So this could be a piece of property that we go camping on that we just a weekend away.
Right. And on the silly side of things, we wanted a place where we had enough land that if we wanted to lay out some watermelons and shoot at them,
Well,
we
yes,
could. And I mean, that sounds silly, but honestly, finding a place where you can shoot some watermelons is harder than it sounds.
it's actually exceptionally unless you know somebody with land.
Right, unless you know, which that was the whole goal
Yeah,
now. It's go get some land so that
yeah,
we are the guys we know with land.
exactly. So, but that land also serves. It serves you today and makes your life
Right.
better today. But you're also prepared for a disaster as long as that property is far enough away.
But now we are
That
digressing a little bit, so let's try to pull it back into the rule of threes.
right. Okay, we'll wrap up with this. But the so you get into that, and you can cache at your bug out location. There's security concerns with that are not topical to the show today,
Right.
but it is something for people that are wanting information about that we can get into in a later show that that purely focuses on that. The rule of threes goes on to like you go on to water, and water is interesting. It's interesting in that it's a pain in the ass to store from the standpoint of how much real estate in your home and in wherever you're caching that it takes up. I use we've mentioned it before. I'll use and Jonathan, I believe you do too, those Reliance 5-gallon water jugs.
Yes, I do.
The main reason we use those specifically is because they have real nice spouts. It's not just you screw off top and you have this giant gaping hole to pour water all over yourself
Right.
with. It actually has a nice little spout.
I also like it because it's 7 gallons, which in my head allows me to have 7 days per person per jug. I
Yeah.
mean, that's kind of the way I look at it.
I use the 5-gallon because I look at it as far as Jen is a very small person.
So she needs less.
Well, it's not that she needs less. It's if I am injured in some way, incapacitated, and cannot carry them,
Right.
5 gallons is about 50 pounds. And I
Yeah.
think that's about the limit of where she's going to be able to drag a couple of water containers
Right.
to a car and get out of Dodge. So that's why I've limited it to the 5 gallons. But that takes up approximately, what is it, 3 cubic feet, I think, maybe.
It's a good amount of space.
Yeah. So you're dealing with taking up space, and that's where the issue of water comes in, and then needing a gallon per person per day and half a gallon per pet, just a good rule of thumb. But then you have the issue of doing it in other places. So you have the initial water supply that you have, that's the city, or you have a well or whatever. That is your initial water supply. Then you have your stored water supply, which is your second. And then there's rain catchment systems. There's all kinds of stuff you can get into with that. Rain, as we've recently found out, even if you're in a very wet area, we're in
It's
a
not
subtropical
predictable.
climate. It's not predictable. You can't water the rabbits on it.
No, and
No.
we live in a subtropical environment. I don't
Mhm.
understand what's going on.
It's global climate change,
Must
man.
be.
So, all right, we're not gonna
Don't send us emails on that, please.
No. Moving on to shelters, and here bug out locations are going to come up again. But you have the bug out locations that I really want to make it a point that I don't believe anyone should buy a bug out location purely for the idea that it's a bug out. Buy
No.
something that you're going to go use and make sure that it's not more than a few hours away from your home. Because if it's more than a few hours away from your home, you're never going to go there.
Right. Make it an enjoyable place to go get away. If you
Yeah.
like camping, make it a place you can camp. If you like water, get something near water. I mean, just make it somewhere you're going to want to go. Because if you're not using it, then until there's some crazy event that occurs, which may never happen in your lifetime, you've just tied money up in something that you're really not going to be able to use.
Yeah. An example of this would be, oh God, it was probably 15 years ago. My father was trying to do a male bonding thing with my brother and I, and we got a deer lease.
Mm-hmm.
And this deer lease was, I want to say, a 9-hour drive from Houston.
Right.
We went I went once, and it
Yeah.
wasn't that I didn't enjoy it. Hunting really doesn't excite me anyway. I don't
Right.
dislike it. I don't really care for it either. But it had nothing to do with that. It simply had to do with that was to get an enjoyable experience. I had to have 3 days dedicated to that, and I think at that point in my life, hunting season always wound up in the middle of college finals.
Yep.
So that frustrated him further. So I think we had this deer lease that was a very expensive deer lease for, I'd say, 5 years. And I went once. I think he maybe went two or three. I think he went 3 times. He went once with me, once with my brother, and once by himself. And that was it. And we had, the reason we didn't go was just, it was so far away.
Right. And the key here is do not burden yourself financially with something that you're not going to be able to get a return on. And I don't necessarily mean a return in dollars, but even a return in your own enjoyment. I mean, your own pleasure. Getting a bug out location purely as, if the world if the shit hits the fan and the zombie apocalypse happens, that's where I'm going, then don't do it.
Yeah. A second means of procuring shelter in
Yep.
a disaster situation where you're forced to leave your home would be friends and family. Again, this becomes problematic in that you're now, even if you have a system in place and an agreement in place with people,
Mm-hmm.
where, let's say, I have a friend that lives in Phoenix, Arizona, and he's savvy to the podcast and the community. And I think he would be okay with having an agreement of, hey, if things went really bad, can I come stay with you in Phoenix? I wouldn't want to. I want to go visit him, but I wouldn't want to be there under those conditions. I mean, there's the old expression from
Right.
Benjamin Franklin about
Yeah.
guests and fish in 3 days and they stink.
Yep.
But I don't. I wouldn't want to be dependent, and I wouldn't want to be a burden on somebody else. But it is an option. And when it comes to family, well, that's part of their job is to take you in when.
Right.
But you still don't want to be a burden on family
And
or
again,
be in their
looking
business.
at this in a realistic way, these are things you're going to use for short periods of time because you don't expect the entire civilization to collapse. Now, in a flood environment, if that really does happen, they may be a short place to stay as you deal with your insurance issues and
Hmm.
everything else, that you can then go to number three on the list of places you can
Yeah.
possibly stay, which is hotels.
Yes.
Know what's around you. I mean, you don't have that doesn't mean you need to keep in your Rolodex or in your phone or something the number for every single hotel in your region, but know where you can go that's right outside your city or maybe 150 miles away that you can get to. Know how to get there.
Yeah, and
Understand where it is.
that goes into planning evacuations and things like
Right.
will that is a complicated topic that we're going to bring somebody in. We're
Yes.
going to bring in a special guest to talk about that. We're still trying to find exactly the right
Right,
person.
but not keep, so evacuation aside, understand that's a complex issue.
Yeah.
Know where the hotels are in general. Don't if you are going to go look for a shelter location, don't drive towards where you know there are no hotels.
Yes.
That's not a good idea unless you're going towards number 4.
Number 4 is also problematic, but it is certainly an option, and I think it's one that a lot of people in the survival community talk about often, and I'll talk about why it's not necessarily a bad idea, but a problematic idea in a minute,
Mm-hmm.
which is camping. You can, if you enjoy camping and don't make the disaster the first time you ever go camping with your
Right.
family.
Shouldn't be the first time you set up the tent.
Yeah, exactly. As a friend of ours, against our warning, did try once.
Right. Many times actually.
Well,
He
we've
did
had
that
it.
with a few things.
Yeah, he did. But the camping is an option. You can have your camping equipment. Like I keep my camping equipment organized and always ready to go. Not be necessarily for this reason. I do it because if I'm going on a camping trip, I don't like to think about where all my stuff is. I don't like to, so I keep it organized and I keep it in pretty much an area where it's very accessible and very easy to leave quickly with. It's an option. Here's the caveat to all of this. Within the survival community, people, well, and you find this more with newer people. Well, I'll just run off to a state park. Well, let's think about that for a second. You and every other person that's ever said that and it's the first thought that everybody always says, oh, I'll run off to a state park. State parks have very limited infrastructure. They can only support so many people for so long. At that point, it almost becomes kind of a FEMA camp situation, which is pretty nasty, overrun. It's not something you want to fall back on.
Right, and remember, you're not going to be able to go to your local state, whatever the closest state park is.
Yeah, you're
That's going
not
to have
going
the
there.
same issues that wherever you live have.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to go pretty far away, and you don't know what the vacancy situation is
Hmm.
there beforehand. So it may, and you also the other side of that is outside state parks, you say, well, I could just camp in an open field. Well, you don't know if someone owns that open field.
Yeah, and you
And
don't
that's pretty
know
dangerous in states that have uh, looser gun laws,
castle laws.
castle laws. Yeah,
Yeah, I know. In Texas, if somebody's on your property after dark, you don't even have to give them warning.
right.
I mean,
Now, I think a
that's
lot of people, if they saw a tent going up, would
yes,
probably give you warning, but
but
you're taking a lot of risk by doing that.
and in a disaster situation where there's people fleeing a city, they don't know what's coming at them,
Right, and
and
they're at
they're
a heightened
nervous.
state of alert already.
Yeah, so these are things to consider when looking at shelter. Moving on to security, we brought that up early on. Security is a lot of things. First and foremost, your first line of security is your mental state. There's a really great expression, and everybody or a lot of people use it, but it's have brains. Don't do stupid things with stupid people in stupid places. Don't have knee jerk reactions while you're out. Think
What
through
if they
what you're
have
doing.
candy?
If they have candy, as long as there's windows on their the
Okay,
van,
all
I
right,
think you're
then
okay.
we're good.
But
And ice cream? Because then you got to
well,
go.
ice cream, it's all down.
That's what
I
I'm saying.
forget it. Have situational awareness. Be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of what's going on. When you are not in a completely secure situation, turn off the cell phone. Put it down. Don't walk. God, this drives me crazy when I see people doing it. It's like, driving with a cell phone's bad enough, plugged
Yeah,
up to your ear. But people that will like cross streets talking on the cell phone,
yeah,
every time I see
oblivious to
it,
what's going on around
they're
them.
just paying
Yeah,
no attention. Or walking into their home with their cell phone up against their ear. You have no idea you have no idea, and you're walking into a potentially hazardous situation where you need to be aware, at least
right,
for 30 seconds it takes you to get to your from your car to your home. Being so, like I said, mindset, being aware, paying attention,
right.
that's your
And there's
first line
no,
of
the thing is,
security.
there's no redundancy for that.
No.
So just know that needs to be your number one form of security,
Mm.
no matter where you are. Make sure the people around you are also situationally aware.
The next step in that is having a home that is or a location that is well lit at night.
Yeah, we talked about this in the generator show a little bit.
We did. We talked about it in the generation. We also talked about it with Dan Blackford,
Yep.
the former Secret Service agent, and that was one of his number one. Actually, that was one of the number one reasons for a generator
Yes.
from Bert,
Yep.
and security from Dan.
Yep. Well lit areas.
Yes,
Keep your home well lit.
and that can be in the form of floodlights that are dependent on the grid, or they now make some pretty good floodlights that are solar powered. There's that. There's having an alarm on your home. No, if the power is completely out and the phone lines are down, an alarm
Well, the
may
alarm
not.
usually has a battery
It
backup, and
has a
then a
battery
lot of
backup.
the new ones also have the cellular radios.
Yes. At that point, they're not calling the police, but they're at least making a lot of noise and
Right.
drawing attention to anything going on. And that is one of the rare advantages an urban survivalist has in disaster situations is community is closer, more tightly packed, more eyes on things, more people at a heightened sense of things.
And it's a little bit regional, but what we've found, at least living here in Houston, is during disasters, you may never have met your neighbors before,
All of a sudden,
but
you're their new best
in
friend.
a disaster, people really do band together here. Now, again, I am not going to speak for other regions of the country.
No.
We've seen and heard stories from other areas that are not quite the same. And if you live in those areas, maybe make an effort prior to a disaster and now we believe in making the effort no matter where you are
Mm.
in building that community around you. But make an extra effort if you know that your area is particularly unfriendly, um, and really band together in a disaster. And when that happens, people are going to watch out for each other.
Hmm. That's regionally, as far as what we've seen in our own areas and in a few other areas, we've seen people where people act like snapper heads.
Right.
But more often than not, what we tend to see are communities locked down and band together. They see a strange person walking around, even in big cities. They see a strange person in their neighborhood walking around they've never met before. Everybody is instantly on that person. What is this? What's going on?
Right. So just to give you an idea on that, the security that we're talking about here, the rule of three really is you've got your own alarm, you've got lights, and you have your community to respond. So that's where you would have that within your rules of three concept here. Your redundancy really is they're not the same thing, but they all provide you the same service in the end.
The final one in this is firearms. If
Yep.
you believe in believing in firearms, I believe is a
I,
stupid
I
statement.
believe they are there, and no matter what you want to do,
They
they're always
exist.
going to be there.
But I guess believing in the use of
Right.
force, we'll
Right.
say, is more of a broader topic. The use of force should always be a last resort,
Right. But it's one that you need to understand and be well trained on so that it doesn't become the last resort you thought of after it was too late.
or the adage of if all you have is a hammer, everything
Right.
looks like a nail.
Exactly.
Firearms should always be well maintained, in good working order,
Right.
checked
And
on, even if you don't use them regularly, which would drive me batty. They need to be in. You need to ensure that they're in good working mechanical order on a
and we've
regular
said this many
basis.
times. We recommend ongoing training when it comes to firearms. Now, in the world of redundancy with firearms, something we can really quickly go into, and we're not going to go into too much detail on it because we've had whole firearm shows. But for instance, Aaron and I both, and in the world of survival, we can talk about firearms in multiple things. There's security, but there's also using it as a general tool to get food and
Food
things like that.
procurement.
So when we talked about the 1022s many times, I can tell you right now that in just the spare parts that Aaron and I have laying around, we can probably build an entire 1022 in spare parts. That's not including the two 1022s that we have built up already. And that provides a lot of redundancy. Things do break, no matter how durable they are. And we may get emails on this that I've never had a 1022 break on me after 100,000 rounds. That's great, but all you need is that one time the firing pin does something weird, and I can tell you right now that I can immediately, if one of my 1022s does that, I have a spare bolt that I can throw in, and in that bolt is a firing pin. For those of you who don't know firearms well, the point is it's a replacement part that can quickly replace that, and I have that redundancy. And I can tell you right now that I have the ability to have three 1022s.
And there's the redundancy in your knowledge, being able to, and the
Yes,
skill, even though 1022s require very little skill to
right,
work on, there's the skill and the knowledge of to be able to repair it,
right.
which is a form of
Now
redundancy.
I know we both also have spare parts for our defensive handguns. And for our ARs and things like that. So we keep those kinds of spare parts around. Now, for those weapons, you don't necessarily have as many spare parts as you do for a 1022, but you know that the most likely scenarios can be met with a replacement.
Moving on to energy, there's just like with water, there's your first energy, which
Yep,
comes off the grid.
yep.
Then, like we did a whole show on with Bert Koenig, there's dedicated standby generators.
Right, and just like we did a review on, there's little portable, and I'm going to call it a generator because it is. It's a little solar-powered battery,
Hmm.
the juice, and you can carry that with you. So there's a lot of different redundancy built in there. Um, that kind again, it's that kind of thinking that you have to have. And since energy is so important to everything we do, you can't make a so you need to make that emergency phone call as the grid comes back up and cell phones start working normally again. Well, your cell phone's been dead for 2 days. But if you had, say, the solar generator or a generator on your home or something like that, well, now you can make that phone call to let everybody know, hey, I'm okay. Your friends and family in the Northeast or in California or wherever it might be, now they can know you're okay.
Yeah. And solar is an interesting one, and it's one that we are working on getting a guest on to really talk about doing big solar on a property. And it's one of the the self sufficiency three phase experiment I'm working on to see how far off the grid I can take myself
In an urban
in an
environment.
urban
I mean,
environment and maintaining a
yeah,
normal
without your
lifestyle.
neighbors looking at you like you're funny.
Well, they already do that, but
That's
that's
true.
okay because they're funny too. But
That's definitely true.
beside the point, the their redundancy is a concept.
Hmm.
Redundancy does not need to be done overnight. It's like we've said often, survival and prepping is a marathon. It is not a sprint. If you have the finances to go out and do blue sky budgets, do everything to the hilt, everything all at once, then you can go bananas. But even then, I don't recommend it because with time comes knowledge and experience, and with knowledge and experience of doing things slowly, they're done much better because you see little problems, even like we were just talking about at the very beginning of the cage with the rabbit cages, where I built them to spec and on really good advice. But even after doing that, I already see other ways that I can really improve the efficiency of those structures and
Yeah,
everything else.
you're listening to the show, so you're already brilliant people. So,
Exactly.
so as you listen to, you're listening to this, as you do things, you're probably similar to us in the way of you do something the first time, and you're going to learn 10 things that you could have done better. And you're going to apply it the next time. And as you do it the next time, you're going to learn 10 more things that you could have done better. And it's going to lead you towards perfection, but since there's no such thing, you're always just going to get better at it. It's the whole practice makes perfect idea. Well, even application also makes perfect. If you keep applying and learning from your application, then you'll get better and better at it. And, I know we just touched on a high level of a lot of this redundancy stuff. And a lot of that is we've only got so much time before we start boring you. So,
And each other.
and each other. So, with that said, I would like everybody to, as you listen to the show, if you have a lot more questions, throw them on the website, interact with us, use Facebook, use the site, use all the media you know how to use to get to us. Um, and we can have another show on it. If you think you got it and we're not getting a ton of questions, instead we're getting discussion, let's keep discussing it on the website. We love that. We love discussing it on Facebook. We've started a few Facebook discussions along the way.
Mhm.
They've all been great. We've learned a lot from them. I'm hoping the people who have started those discussions with us are learning a lot from them too. I think they are.
They all seem to have stuck around.
I was
So
about to say
they
everybody
look like
seems to be sticking around, so we're doing all right so far.
Mm.
But we love having online discussions with you, and if the discussions get really good, we can take it back to the show and do some more on here. But overall, we've only got so much time that we can dedicate to this a week. So while it feels like we didn't get into too much detail on redundancy, it's the concepts we wanted to get across, and hopefully you're thinking about it in a different way now.
More often than not, we want to help you think about things, give you
Right.
concepts,
Yep.
rather than go here, do this, A, B, C. That's not as useful as having the concepts
Yep.
that really drive home what you're going to do.
And we keep saying it, the show's still relatively new, and I guess we get to use that for a little while, I think.
I think we get a few more
Yeah, I
episodes where
think
we
we
get
get
to say
a few
that.
more episodes before we have to say that we've been doing this a while. But since we're still new, we're still perfecting the show, like we said. It's like we do anything. We're hoping it's getting better and better. So again, your comments on the show are also very much appreciated because it helps us do our jobs better.
And with that, we wrap up episode 17. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you also for bearing with us today through the pops, snaps, and microphone attacks. We were having a few technical difficulties. If you liked the podcast, be sure to leave us a review in iTunes. It helps others find us, and it lets us know how we're doing. If you didn't like the show, don't be shy. Use the feedback form and tell us about it. And if you have any ideas on how we can improve, we want to know about that too. Be sure to connect with us through Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter through the links on the top right-hand side of the site at www.intherabbithole.com. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter by visiting the newsletter page. By connecting with us, you receive updates about the site and notifications of new articles and podcast episodes. That's right, we're not just a podcast. Every week, articles are posted on the site, intherabbithole.com, that cover all manner of topics relating to surviving in an urban environment, whether in good times or in extreme circumstances. Show notes are posted with each and every episode where we invite you, the listener, to comment on the show and interact with us. Share ideas with other listeners. Till next time, stay safe and sound.